My mom got pregnant in high school and put me up for adoption cause she couldn't take care of me. Then out of the blue 2 years ago, 24 at this time BTW, I get a Facebook message from my 18-year-old half-sister. Turns out I have two younger sisters, a niece, a grandpa, and all the normal family stuff, which was weird for me as my adopted mom is 76 and my dad is deceased. I went from the youngest in one family to the oldest in the other. Oh, and my mother was scared shitless when we met cause she thought I'd hate her for giving me away. I don't, and honestly, I was expecting a drug addict, not a hard-working woman who trains service horses and dogs. The silence in the apartment was usually a comfort. Ethan liked the quiet hum of his high-end server equipment, the precise click of his mechanical keyboard, the white noise of a life meticulously curated and ordered. At 24, he felt less like a young man just beginning his adult life and more like the quiet curator of a museum. Everything was clean, minimalist, and predictable. His mother, Eleanor, lived an hour away in their suburban Pennsylvania home, a woman of 76 whose existence revolved around her late husband's memory and Ethan's quiet devotion. Ethan was the youngest, the cherished only child, and for 24 years, that was the entirety of his family narrative. His father had died 5 years ago, leaving a void that Ethan had attempted to fill with stoicism and quiet diligence. It was 11:03 p.m. when the notification pinged, a faint chime that usually meant nothing more than a scheduled system update or an email from a late working client. Ethan flicked over to Facebook Messenger, irritated at the distraction. The sender's profile picture was a vibrant, slightly messy photo of a young woman with a bold smile and bright, challenging eyes. She looked 18, maybe 19, with dark hair tied back in a careless knot. Her name was Maya Rivers. He had never seen her before. He clicked on the message thread. It held only 6 words. "Hi, my name is Maya. This is going to sound completely insane, but I think you might be my brother." The sudden, brutal intimacy of the text was jarring. Ethan felt the oddest sensation, his chest tightening, his mind racing to catalog the impossible. He had no siblings. He was adopted. His entire identity was fixed. Yet, the message lay there, a tiny, digital hand grenade thrown into the perfect stillness of his life. He didn't believe it, not really. But the intellectual curiosity, the need to know the source of the aberration, compelled him to click on her profile. No mutual friends. Her city was listed as Oakhaven, PA, a small, unremarkable county town about 60 miles north, right in the area his adoption papers vaguely referenced. He glanced down at the date of birth listed in his government documents, March 12th. He typed a precise, cautious reply. "What makes you think that?" The response was instant, confirming his earlier, chilling suspicion. "My mom, Sarah. She had a baby when she was really young, in high school. Gave him up for adoption. We've talked about it. She never forgot his birthday. She finally told me his full name, Ethan Brooks, and I've been searching. You match the age and the city. Is your birthday in March?" His fingers trembled slightly as he typed the confirmation. March 12th. A long pause followed, filled with the loud, ringing silence of a broken narrative. The next message, when it came, was a burst of youthful, unrestrained excitement. "'Tis you. Oh my God. I'm going to call my mom. Can I give you her number? She's going to be beside herself. We've wanted to find you for so long. We have so much to tell you. You have 2 younger sisters, me and Chloe, and a nephew, Liam. And Grandpa George is still around. You went from the youngest in one family to the oldest in another. The shift in status, from the baby of a much older family to the elder brother in this sudden, crowded new one, made him smile for the first time. The oldest. It had an oddly fitting ring to it. Ethan Brooks, the reluctant patriarch. He quickly typed back, asking for a moment to process this and for a phone number. He needed to talk to Eleanor first. His adopted mother deserved better than a sudden, chaotic collision with his past. He immediately called her landline. She picked up on the second ring, her voice slightly fuzzy with sleep. "Ethan, darling? Is everything all right? You don't usually call this late." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his own voice measured. "Everything's fine, Mom. I got a message tonight from my birth family. Half-sister." He heard a sharp intake of breath. The silence on the other end was far heavier than the one he just experienced on Facebook. "Oh, Ethan," Eleanor finally murmured, her voice laced with an emotion he rarely heard. raw, undisguised fear. Why would they do this now? After all this time? She's 18. She found me through my full name and birth date, Ethan explained, trying to stick to the facts. It's Maya, and she says I have two sisters, a nephew, and a grandfather. A nephew? Eleanor asked, her voice cracking. That woman. She couldn't even raise you, and now she has more children pulling you away? Ethan, darling, please, be careful. They chose to give you up for a reason. You have a good life here. You have us. Ethan closed his eyes. Eleanor was the product of a different generation, where discretion was paramount and family meant the ones who raised you. Her anxiety was rooted in a love he understood, but also a deep-seated fear of instability and the judgment of others. I know, Mom, he said softly, and you are my mother. Nothing will ever change that. I owe it to myself to meet them, to see where I came from. Eleanor sighed, a long, weary sound. Your father would have been beside himself. He was always so worried you'd search. Promise me you won't get hurt, Ethan. Promise me you won't go looking for something that isn't there. I promise I will be careful, he replied, recognizing that this was the best he could offer. I'm meeting my biological mother, Sarah, in a couple of days. Well, Eleanor sniffed, gathering her composure. Tell me what she's like then. Is she a success story? It's a miracle if she turned things around after getting pregnant so young. I always assumed she was fighting a battle with the difficulties of life. The implied question hung there. Is she a disappointment? Is she a drug addict? Are they respectable? Ethan hesitated, an unfamiliar surge of protectiveness for this woman he hadn't yet met welling up inside him. I don't know, Mom. I'll let you know. He hung up, the weight of his two separate lives suddenly crashing in on him. He picked up his keys. He had a few days to prepare for his first trip to Oakhaven, and he needed a clear head. 2 days later, he was there. The address led him to a rambling, weathered farmhouse surrounded by open pastures and fencing. A wooden sign on the gate read, Rivers Service Animals and Equestrian Therapy. Ethan pulled his imported sedan into the gravel driveway. This was not the life of a failure. It was the messy, demanding life of a small business owner. A woman emerged from a large barn, drying her hands on a piece of faded denim. She was sun-kissed and strong, with calloused hands and a pair of kind, but anxious eyes that were instantly recognizable as Maya's and his own. This was Sarah. He walked toward her, and Sarah stopped dead in her tracks, her composure shattering. The fear on her face was palpable, a raw wound of regret and anxiety. Ethan, she whispered, her voice a fragile thing. I thought you'd walk in here and just despise me. Ethan simply stood there for a moment, absorbing the reality of her, the real, breathing, hard-working woman. The unexpected truth settled over him with a calming weight. I'm so glad Maya reached out, Ethan said, his voice slow and steady. And honestly, Sarah, I never hated you. I was lucky. My parents gave me a wonderful life. Sarah broke eye contact, fiddling with the edge of her worn shirt. It means more than you know to hear you say that, Ethan. I expected you to come here looking for a drug addict, or worse, someone who completely threw their life away. It took everything I had to build this business and keep a roof over my girls' heads. Ethan finally allowed himself a genuine, warm smile. Well, I'm glad to see you're not a drug addict, he said. And I'm glad you're a hard-working woman. It makes sense, actually. The good genes are clearly there. Ethan spent his first full weekend in Oakhaven in a state of fascinated disbelief. His adopted life, centered around the predictable ebb and flow of remote IT work and the hushed formality of his suburban upbringing, felt light years away. He had grown up among the quiet, expensive sounds of high-end suburban living and the abstract language of cloud computing and digital security. His world was sterile, organized, and largely static. Sarah's life, however, was a constant, fluid organism, a testament to sustainable living powered by sheer physical labor. The house, built in the early 1900s, smelled of fresh coffee, damp earth, and clean horse blankets. His adopted mother, Eleanor, maintained their home with an immaculate, almost obsessive diligence, focused on aesthetics and antique preservation. Sarah's home was functional, messy, and loud. He quickly learned that Sarah's business, Riverside Service Animals, was a complex operation. She wasn't just a dog trainer. She was an accredited equine and service dog handler, often working with veterans or children with severe autism. The work was demanding and deeply personal. He watched her train a young golden retriever to retrieve medication and a large, calm horse to accept a rider with limited mobility. He saw the integrity in her hands and the exhaustion in her eyes. It was clear this woman hadn't thrown her life away. She had simply found a much harder, more fulfilling path. Maya, his 18-year-old half-sister, was a whirlwind of teenage energy and modern communication, perfectly embodying the newest generation of his family. She spoke the language of digital marketing and TikTok trends, eager to get into a local community college for an associate's degree in media studies. She was the reason he was here, and her open, unreserved excitement was infectious. She peppered him with questions about web design fundamentals and freelance graphic design, the very career path his parents had once belittled him for choosing. He felt a kinship with her immediately. The true challenge, however, was Chloe. At 16, and already a mother to baby Liam, she was quiet, moody, and guarded. Her entire posture, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes darting away quickly, screamed skepticism. She clung to Liam like a shield, wary of this sudden, older male intrusion into their fragile unit. She viewed Ethan as an outsider, a ghost from a past Sarah rarely spoke of. One afternoon, Ethan found her trying to change Liam's diaper while simultaneously struggling with a sluggish wireless router that was supposed to provide internet access for her high school assignments. Having some trouble with the network latency? Ethan asked gently, approaching the small table near the window. Chloe flinched, pulling Liam slightly closer. It keeps cutting out. It's useless. Ethan didn't offer a suggestion. Instead, he sat down a few feet away and quietly logged into his laptop. That router is running an outdated firmware version, he observed, keeping his tone non-judgmental and focused solely on the technology. It's practically running on dial-up speeds. You're trying to do high-demand tasks like streaming video for your online classes, but it can only handle basic email. It's a bottleneck in your system. The whole system is a bottleneck, Chloe muttered, adjusting Liam. No, actually, Ethan counted, still looking at his laptop. The foundation is solid. Your mom is running a thriving local business. You just need to upgrade the right components. He spoke about the hardware and software in terms of her life, not as a lecture, but as a practical problem to be solved. He casually checked the specs on the laptop, mentioning that even her hardware could handle more if the Internet of Things ecosystem was better optimized. He spent the next half hour silently fixing the router settings and then made a simple recommendation: a new, affordable mesh Wi-Fi system that he could easily install. He didn't mention money, only solutions. The quiet confidence and technical focus broke through Chloe's guard, if only slightly. Later, he found an unexpected confidant in his grandfather, Grandpa George. George was a man of the land, retired now, but still managing a small, highly productive hydroponic garden in the backyard. A small miracle of engineering and organic farming. You've got Sarah's eyes, George said, sitting on the porch swing, carving a piece of cedar, and her sense of propriety. She was always too proud to ask for anything. Ethan brought up the subject of the dilapidated back shed and the old tools in Sarah's care. He mentioned that the shed's structural integrity was failing and offered to oversee some home repair and renovation work on the property, a hands-on outlet for his recently realized skills. You remind me of your grandmother, George chuckled. The way you stare at a broken thing and just know how to fix it. He looked out at the old, overgrown vegetable patch. Your grandmother wanted that cottage to be a real sanctuary, a debt-free home where nobody could tell her family what to do. That word, sanctuary, resonated deeply with Ethan, linking the cottage to the sentiment his adopted mother, Eleanor, had tried to instill in their home. The difference was that this new family's sanctuary was built on grit, not just money. By the end of the weekend, Ethan's sense of self had fractured and reformed. He saw the life he almost had, a life where he would have had to fight tooth and nail for every small success, much like Sarah had. But he also saw a genuine, messy, open-hearted connection that he realized had been missing from his adopted life. He had finally found his biological roots, and they were, surprisingly, the authentic chosen family he never realized he was looking for. Now he just had to figure out how to integrate this loud, passionate world with his quiet one back in the city. Stepping out of his perfectly maintained sedan and onto the dusty drive of Sarah's property was Ethan's first lesson in cultural dissonance. For a young adult adopted at birth, His world with Eleanor had been one of hushed tones, meticulously organized shelves, and the cerebral pursuit of IT solutions. This world, however, was a symphony of chaos. A border collie, wearing a brightly colored harness with a service dog and training patch, barked enthusiastically, momentarily diverting Ethan's attention. This was the hub of service dog training, and the air was alive with the sense of hay, earth, and animal energy. Grandpa George, a man whose hands looked like gnarled oak branches, met him on the porch. "Welcome home, Ethan," he said, his voice deep and rough, wrapping Ethan in a hug that smelled faintly of sawdust and pipe tobacco. It was a simple, unfiltered embrace, entirely unlike the stiff, formal gestures Ethan was used to. This was his intergenerational family, a loud, living, breathing unit that made his quiet apartment feel like a vacuum. The inside of the house was a whirlwind. Liam, his nephew, was gurgling happily in a playpen fashioned out of wood scraps, while Maya juggled college applications and a video call, her energy bubbling. Chloe, 16, stood near the kitchen, arms crossed, her eyes narrowed in a protective, almost hostile way. She was the fiercest gatekeeper of her mother's world. Ethan, accustomed to being the pampered youngest, was suddenly looking at a family where he was the oldest, expected to offer, not receive. His own life, anchored in the logical precision of a remote graphic design business, seemed a galaxy away from the physical reality of their hardscrabble existence. Ethan watched Sarah wipe sweat from her brow as she came in from the barn. She was strong. The realization hit him. She hadn't failed by giving him up. She had sacrificed for him, then worked relentlessly to build a life for the girls she kept. The judgment he'd been carrying melted away, replaced by a profound respect for the resilience of his birth mother. Later that evening, as Grandpa George held court with stories on the porch, a quiet space finally opened up. Ethan found Chloe staring at him from the doorway. "You really think you're going to stay?" she muttered, the first direct challenge he'd faced since the adoption reunion. Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm not going anywhere, Chloe. I'm just here to get to know my family." Chloe looked away, but the intensity of her glare had lessened. The oldest brother had arrived, and the long, complicated work of family was just beginning. The sun sets, casting long shadows across the dusty floor of the barn. The horses have been fed, and the kennels are quiet. The air smells of leather, hay, and damp earth. Sarah, 42, and Ethan, 24, are sitting on a bale of hay, sharing a moment of calm. This is the first time they've been alone since Ethan arrived. "Ethan, I look at your life now, running this amazing service animal training business, juggling all the schedules, managing Chloe and Liam. It's a lot. And I can't help but think about the girl who faced a high school pregnancy in a small town. It must have been terrifying." Sarah takes a deep breath, her eyes scanning the familiar beams of the barn roof. She fidgets with a frayed edge of her worn denim jacket. "Sarah, it was. It really was. My parents, Grandpa George, they were good people, but they were traditional. Being pregnant at 16 was a scandal. It felt like everyone in town was whispering. My whole future, everything I thought I knew, just vanished." "Ethan, what about my biological father?" "Sarah, he was already moving on, focused on a football scholarship. I was a distraction. He didn't want the responsibility. And honestly, I didn't want him involved. He wasn't emotionally ready. I realized early on it was just me." She pauses, twisting a loose thread. Sarah commented, "When I made the decision for the adoption, it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you so much. I couldn't bear to keep you tethered to a life of uncertainty. I barely had money for bus fare, let alone a baby. I wanted you to have a solid foundation, a roof over your head that wasn't about to collapse. I wanted you to have opportunities I could never provide." Ethan nods slowly. He remembers the narrative his adoptive parents instilled, that his birth mother was a young girl who made a choice out of overwhelming love. Hearing it directly, however, has a profound impact. "Ethan, I understand now. I truly do. It was a hell of a decision, Sarah. A mature one, Sarah. And then I saw your photo on Facebook. I kept searching for years, just hoping for a glimpse of your life, knowing it was probably the only adoption reunion story I'd ever get. When Maya finally got you to talk to me, I was terrified, truly. I had this picture in my head." She breaks off, looking down at her hands. "Ethan, you thought I'd hate you, or worse, that I'd be damaged. Sarah, Yes. I imagined you'd be dealing with addiction, maybe living rough. I'd built this image of the worst possible outcome in my head, just to prepare myself for the pain. And then you walked in. You, an accomplished adult adoptee with a good job, quiet and gentle. When you mentioned being ready for a drug addict, it almost broke me. It showed me how deep the shame of that high school pregnancy adoption has been buried inside me. Ethan. I had the opposite fear. I was worried I'd find someone who didn't want me, or worse, someone who'd pull me into chaos. But you're here. You built this. A whole complex family dynamic and a successful service animal training business. That takes guts. Sarah. It was the only way I knew how to atone. After giving you up, I promised myself I would work to give any future children and myself a life of stability. I went into emotional support animal certification training. It's hard work, but it's real. It's mine. Ethan. It's incredible. It's what I noticed most. The work ethic, the drive. It's why I want to help you take it to the next level. I saw your accounting ledgers. You're leaving money on the table, Mom. Sarah smiles weakly at the informal mom. It sounds so natural coming from the mouth of the son she thought she'd lost forever. Sarah. I'm not exactly a business major, Ethan. You see me, and you see the future. You're the oldest sibling in this whole new world, after all. What are your ideas, elder brother? Ethan. We need a proper structure. I can handle the IT and marketing remotely. We can leverage the local market and your specialization in dog training career services. It's time to build a real brand, a financial future, not just survival. And honestly, I need a purpose beyond looking at spreadsheets. Sarah watches him, her eyes finally clearing of the anxiety that has shadowed them. In his confidence, she sees the validation she has sought for 24 years. The choice she made was hard, but it wasn't wrong. Sarah, a brand new adventure. Together. Ethan nods. Part 5 arrived with Ethan fully embracing his unexpected new role as the eldest sibling in the Rivers family, a position that came with immediate and complex responsibilities that tested his capacity for empathy and action. This period was crucial for navigating the nascent blended family dynamics that were beginning to take shape around him. With Maya, the connection was easy and flowing. She was open, effusive, and hungry for any piece of her older half-sister's life he was willing to share. Their conversations, fueled by her tireless curiosity, quickly established a warm and modern half-sister relationship, often taking place over video calls late into the evening after the rest of the household settled down. He admired her courage for taking the initiative to find him, recognizing that she was the true catalyst for this incredible adoption reunion stories chapter in all their lives. She readily accepted his advice on college applications and business networking, seeing him as a fountain of knowledge from the world she aspired to enter. However, connecting with Chloe was proving to be a challenge. The 16-year-old single mother remained guarded, her gaze often darting away, wary of this sudden presence from a distant past. She spent most of her time tending to baby Liam, or quietly doing chores, avoiding direct interaction with Ethan, perhaps instinctively mirroring her mother's initial anxiety. Ethan, the adopted son meets biological family, realized that to reach her, he couldn't play the role of the aloof, successful stranger. He needed to be simply Ethan, the quiet observer who had learned early on what it felt like to stand outside a known world. He saw in Chloe a reflection of Sarah's own painful high school past, only amplified by the suddenness of his arrival. Chloe's palpable shame about her circumstances hinted at deeper family trauma. The fear of judgment, so intense that it manifested as near total emotional withdrawal. She desperately wanted to be seen as a capable mother and sister, but carried the fear that everyone, Sarah included, was constantly comparing her to the mother she should have been or the sister she shouldn't be. The breakthrough came one afternoon in the service animal training barn. Ethan found Chloe sitting alone on a bale of hay, Liam asleep in a carrier beside her. Ethan, without preamble, spoke about his life with Eleanor, touching on the quiet sorrow that came with knowing a part of his history was missing. He deliberately shared a memory of feeling like an outsider in his adoptive family, the feeling of always playing catch-up to a story that started without him. It was a subtle, carefully worded admission, designed not to elicit sympathy, but to signal understanding. The tension finally broke when Chloe whispered about her own deepest fear. She wasn't just worried about her son, She was terrified of repeating her mother's mistakes, forever casting a shadow on the family that Sarah had worked so hard to maintain. She was afraid that Ethan, the embodiment of a better path, would judge her the harshest. Ethan, the once youngest who now felt the weight of leading this fractured group, found his voice. He emphasized his admiration for Sarah's strength and for Chloe's commitment to Liam. He spoke, not as an adopted outsider, but as the new elder brother, reassuring her that the sibling relationships after adoption were more than just genetic. They were a pact of support. Ethan transitioned his quiet, IT-based assistance for the Service Animal Training Pennsylvania business into something more concrete, moving from an advisory role to an active family partner. He saw that Sarah's enterprise had immense growth potential, but was hamstrung by its small, informal structure. He proposed creating a foundation for the business, one that could secure grants, handle major client contracts, and establish a long-term economic safety net for the family. This move, a true expression of his commitment, began to solidify the sense of a cohesive found family after adoption, and offered a definitive step forward in overcoming family rejection for everyone involved, proving that roots could be planted and grown anew, stronger and more resilient than the ones that had failed him in the past. Ethan drove the familiar suburban routes to his adoptive mother's house twice a week now, an increase he hadn't had to make before. Eleanor's quiet, reserved life, once a predictable comfort, now felt like a fragile bubble he had to handle with extreme care. The sudden inclusion of an entire, messy, and loud biological family had activated all of her deepest insecurities, and it manifested as subtle yet piercing anxiety. He found her one Saturday morning attempting, with palpable effort, to navigate the complexities of her smart TV remote. She gave up with a sigh and settled into the plush velvet of her armchair, setting down her copy of a well-regarded literary fiction novel. The scene was classic Eleanor: quiet refinement, an environment built on order and intellect. It stood in stark contrast to the lively chaos of Sarah's horse and hay-scented farm, a contrast Ethan now carried within him. "You're seeing them again today?" Eleanor asked, her tone light, but her eyes betraying a deeper concern. "The farmer and her children?" Ethan nodded, pulling up a chair closer to her. "Her name is Sarah, Mom. And yes, Maya and Chloe are lovely, and it turns out Grandpa George is quite the gardener. They are good people." Eleanor gave a small, dismissive huff. "Of course, dear. I'm sure their intentions are entirely rustic." She picked at a loose thread on her armchair. "It's just that I saw Sarah's business page online. The photographs were rather unpolished. Are you entirely certain that they are who they claim to be?" One worries, given how many adoption scams seem to be leveraging digital communication these days. It's a very modern, messy situation. Ethan felt a familiar, protective surge. He had to gently push back against this narrative of judgment, which wasn't about Sarah at all, but about Eleanor's own adoptive parenting challenges. "Mom, I've met them in person. Sarah runs a successful business training service, Animals. 2. She's a genuinely hardworking woman. And Maya is a very bright girl. They're different from us, yes, but that doesn't make them messy or unauthentic." Eleanor's facade softened slightly, a tremor crossing her lips. "I know, Ethan. It's just, I worry. You had a solid upbringing. Your father and I gave you a stable, loving environment, 3, and a financial safety net we worked hard for. And now, this sudden appearance, it feels like an intrusion, as if you're searching for something we failed to provide." "You provided me with everything," Ethan assured her, his voice sincere. "You are my mother, Mom. That will never change. But Sarah, she's my biological mother. She's the one who gave me life, and she did it out of love, even if it was the most difficult decision she's ever made. It's a new family dynamic I'm learning to navigate, not a replacement for my old one." Eleanor's lip trembled. She was fighting a losing battle against her deep-seated elderly anxiety and fear of abandonment. "When your father passed," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I became terrified. We always planned for you to look after me, but not out of obligation, out of love. And now, you have this other life, full of vitality and in youth. What if you realize you preferred that familial energy and leave me here, a lonely elderly parent living in the shadow of a life that was?" Ethan put his arm around her frail shoulder, a rare, conscious act of physical affection in their family. He knew he had to establish boundaries, but he also had to reassure her of the depth of their bond, a bond forged through decades of nurture, not nature. This emotional moment was a crucial step in accepting the complex family relationships that now defined his life. "I am not going anywhere, Mom," he said firmly. "I am Ethan Brooks, your son. And now, I am also an older brother and a nephew. My world has gotten bigger, not smaller. And I promise you, I will always make time for you. You gave me roots and wings. Now I'm just learning how to use the wings and strengthen those roots." He explained his plan to invite the new family over for a controlled, short visit soon. A family reconciliation dinner, he called it. The prospect terrified Eleanor, but Ethan knew that letting his two worlds continue to exist in isolation would only perpetuate the emotional trauma of the past. It was time for his two mothers to acknowledge each other and the singular life they both loved. This was a necessary step towards building a truly integrated, stable future. The air in Sarah's converted barn office, a surprisingly tidy corner carved out amongst the hay bales and dog kennels, was a mix of stale coffee and the earthy musk of working animals. It was a chaotic symphony of life that stood in stark contrast to the sterile quiet of Ethan's adopted upbringing. Yet, here he sat, 3 weekends deep into his new family, running diagnostics on the clunky desktop Sarah used for her animal training schedules. Ethan was in his element. For all his social awkwardness, the world of logic and systems bent easily to his will. Sarah's business, Riverside Service Animals, was fundamentally sound. She had passion, an excellent reputation, and a genuine gift for connecting with clients. The problem was the messy, analog bottleneck she created around herself. "The scheduling software is a nightmare, Mom," Ethan finally announced, spinning his chair around. "It looks like you're trying to run a six-figure business using a glorified spreadsheet and a stack of sticky notes that could choke a pony." Sarah, who was wrestling with a resistant zipper on a feed bag, looked up, her brow furrowed. "It works mostly. And the horses don't care about spreadsheets. But you should," Ethan insisted, tapping the side of the monitor. "I spent yesterday tracking conversion rates from your website traffic. If we streamline the client intake process, automate the contracts, and start taking appointments online, you could realistically free up 10 hours a week just in administration. 10 hours you could spend training or, actually sleeping." Sarah finally conquered the zipper and slowly walked over, leaning against the desk. She looked at the colorful charts and graphs Ethan had generated, a foreign language laid out neatly on her familiar screen. "You've put in a lot of work, Ethan. It looks impressive." Her gaze lingered on the figures, a slight tightening around her mouth. "But you don't have to. I appreciate the help, truly. We're doing fine." The unspoken part of the conversation hung heavy in the air, weighted with the history of the last 24 years. Ethan knew what she meant. "I gave you up because I couldn't manage my life, and I will not be reliant on the son I abandoned." He pushed his chair back, meeting her eye without challenge. "I know you're doing fine, Mom. You built this out of nothing. It takes guts, skill, and sheer grit. But being efficient isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of a smart business person. And frankly," he added, his tone softening but his eyes remaining steady, "I'm tired of seeing you worn out. It's my mess to clean up, though," she murmured, her voice tight. "And I'm asking to be your partner in it," Ethan counted. "Not as charity, not as a repayment for something you think you owe me, but as a family investment. Look at what you've built, a legacy that helps people and animals. That's amazing. And you deserve to grow it without sacrificing your sanity. I have the skills for the back-end stuff. You have the expertise for the real work. Let me formalize this. We'll call it a partnership." Sarah turned away, walking toward the open barn door and staring out at the mid-afternoon light. The horses were quiet in the pasture. She took a long, shaky breath. Her shoulders tensed with the internal battle between her fierce independence and the genuine need for help. She had spent a lifetime proving she could do it all alone, making up for the young, scared girl who made one huge choice. Accepting help felt like failing a test she'd been studying for all her life. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I have my pride. I know, Mom, and I respect it more than you can imagine. But you gave me a life where I learned to master this." He gestured to the computer. "And I want to use it to help the people I care about. We're family now. Not just by blood, but by choice. We build things together. We support each other. It's not a transaction. It's just us. She stood there for a long time, the only movement the slight breeze ruffling her hair. Finally, she turned back, a slight tremble in her chin. You're right about the spreadsheet. It's driving me mad. A small, genuine smile touched Ethan's lips. Good, because I have a plan for a full CRM system, a new invoicing process, and a killer brand redesign that will allow you to finally expand your services past Oakhaven. It starts with setting up a proper legal structure and a contract drawn up by a lawyer you trust. No more handshake deals, no more sticky notes. Sarah nodded slowly, a weary relief washing over her face. Okay, partner, you handle the spreadsheets, and I'll stick to the harses. But you have to promise me one thing. Anything. You're going to teach me what all those confusing graphs mean eventually. Ethan smiled, the warmth in his chest expanding. He was the eldest now, and he finally had a chance to build a family that respected his worth, just as he respected theirs. The local Italian restaurant Ethan had chosen was small, intimate, and mercifully dim. He'd booked a semi-private room, hoping the quiet elegance would encourage diplomacy. It was a fool's hope, he knew. He felt like the curator of a ticking time bomb. The fuse lit the moment the doors opened and his two worlds collided. Eleanor was the first to arrive, pristine and regal in a deep burgundy dress, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She surveyed the room with the practiced eye of a woman accustomed to judging presentation. It's tasteful, Ethan, but perhaps a little too far from the city? She asked, already betraying her unease. It's halfway to Oakhaven, Mom, Ethan said gently, kissing her cheek. It's neutral territory. The second group arrived with a burst of cold air, loud chatter, and the unmistakable scent of harses. Sarah looked striking in an unpretentious, dark skirt and knit sweater, her natural beauty contrasting sharply with Eleanor's polished formality. Behind her trailed Maya, holding a squirming baby Liam, the watchful Chloe, and the patriarch, Grandpa George. The initial greetings were a masterclass in awkwardness. Eleanor offered a brittle nod to Sarah. Sarah, determined to be respectful, was perhaps overly deferential. The tension in the small room was so thick Ethan could almost physically taste it. Surprisingly, the first détente was called by the elders. Grandpa George, sensing Eleanor's discomfort, walked right past Sarah's attempt at an introduction. George Rivers, ma'am, he said, extending a calloused hand to Eleanor. I hear you've spent a lot of time helping this young man. Why, Sarah, and I owe you a debt of gratitude. Eleanor's facade cracked. Here was someone who understood her generation's values, hard work and direct honesty. She sat with him moments later, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips as they discussed the challenges of maintaining large properties and the changing Pennsylvania climate. The small talk was a lifeline, anchoring the conversation away from the deeper currents threatening to pull them all under. Ethan watched Sarah, who was navigating the seating arrangements with the girls. She was doing everything right, everything he could have hoped for. Yet, the anxiety was heavy in her eyes. She kept glancing at Eleanor and back to Ethan, seeking reassurance he couldn't entirely give. He caught Chloe's eye, and the 16-year-old gave him a brief, knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement that she was watching out for her mother. As the main courses arrived, Eleanor, fortified by a glass of Cabernet and unnerved by the sight of her adoptive son so easily slipping into another family's orbit, broke the fragile peace. Sarah, is it? Eleanor asked, her voice carrying a thin, sharp edge. Ethan tells me you train animals. It sounds therapeutic. I'm sure it's fulfilling work. But do you think it provides the stability a family truly needs? The word stability hung in the air, heavy with unspoken context. The implication that Sarah hadn't been stable enough for Ethan 24 years ago, and still wasn't. Sarah's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. She met Eleanor's challenging gaze, her chin trembling slightly. I may not have a bank manager's salary, Eleanor, Sarah began, her voice tight. But I've raised two strong, smart girls and run a good business. We've always had a roof over our heads and food on the table. And most of all, we've had love. The room went silent. Maya looked horrified. Chloe clutched Liam a little tighter. Ethan's heart pounded, but James, seated next to him, placed a calm, solid hand on his arm, a silent command for composure. Ethan took a deep breath and spoke, his voice carrying the authority of his new, hard-won self-awareness. Mom, Sarah is more than stable, he stated, looking directly at Eleanor. She built a whole life from scratch, and I admire her for it. just like I admire you for the life you gave me. I am the man I am because of both of you. But tonight is about building a connection, not judging the paths we took to get here. He looked from Eleanor to Sarah, then addressed the entire table. This is my family, all of you. And there will be boundaries, there will be missteps, but there will be no more judgment, not from anyone at this table. Eleanor stared at him, wounded by the public reprimand but stunned by his growth. Sarah's eyes glistened, relief washing over her face as she realized Ethan had not only stood by her, but had successfully established a new, unshakable foundation for them all. The confrontation was messy, but the boundary was finally, irrevocably set. It was the messy, real start of a truly blended family. A year had passed since the awkward, yet ultimately necessary, merging of my two worlds, and the cottage garden glowed under the late afternoon sun. It was nearly golden hour, and everything felt perfectly, wonderfully balanced. Sarah's business, now formally operating as service and support, was thriving, thanks in part to the new website and booking system I had implemented. My modest design studio, Elevation Designs, was still run out of the converted garage, but the volume of clients allowed me to pick and choose projects, affording me the luxury of time I'd always craved. My initial shock at being the eldest sibling had faded into a quiet confidence. The weight of being the anchor, the one everyone looked to, was a new mantle, but one I wore with pride, especially after a lifetime of feeling like a gentle, easily dismissible afterthought. My two families had found a delicate equilibrium, one built on my insistence that they acknowledge each other's legitimacy in my life, and one that required Eleanor and Sarah to keep their opinions, both critical and complimentary, in check. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Sarah, my birth mother, was visibly transformed. The anxiety that had made her shoulders tense and her hands shake during that first meeting was gone, replaced by the calm, focused energy of a woman who had finally stepped fully into her purpose, free from the crushing weight of her past. She often looked at me now, not with the pleading eyes of a scared mother looking for forgiveness, but with a deep, open gratitude. The unspoken fear that I would judge her for not being the wealthy, capable parent I knew Eleanor and my adopted father to be had evaporated. I saw her for the resilient, hardworking woman who trained animals to assist those in need, a profound and meaningful career that felt more aligned with a desire to give back than any traditional corporate job. The memory of my own desperation, living in my Civic, gave me an insight into her early choice that nothing else could have. She chose a path of sacrifice then, and now she was building a path of unwavering service. My sisters, Maya and Chloe, were doing well. Maya had finished her first year of community college, now a vocal advocate for my foundation, sharing her story about the power of reconnecting with family. Chloe, still fiercely reserved, was managing her young motherhood with a quiet, resolute strength. She was taking online courses in animal health technology, balancing her studies with caring for Liam, my little nephew. I had taken Liam for a few hours every Saturday since moving back, a routine I loved. It was a role I never knew I was missing, the steady, elder brother, a resource for advice, a sounding board for dreams, and an extra pair of hands with a baby. I had gone from the eternal youngest in a family of older, settled people to the grounding force in a new family of high-energy, ambitious young women. Eleanor, my adopted mother, had taken longer to come around, but she had. James and I made sure to spend time with her in the city, bridging the physical distance with genuine affection. She still worried, but her anxiety was no longer rooted in displacement. It was simply the background hum of maternal fear. The blended dinner a year ago had been tough, full of suppressed tension and passive-aggressive glances. But Grandpa George and Eleanor had bonded surprisingly well over a shared love of obscure British historical dramas. James, with his easy charm and absolute refusal to take sides, was the true master key to blending my worlds. He'd seamlessly integrated himself, showing up for Eleanor's birthday, helping Sarah build new fences, and joining my new family for coffee at the bookstore. He was the living embodiment of the supportive relationship I had always desired. Thinking about James brought my mind back to the heart of the journey. I had spent so much of my early 20s convinced that I had to prove my worth to my adopted family by pursuing the traditional, corporate path they championed, only to be abandoned by my biological family just when I needed a soft place to land. It was Grandma Samantha's voice, echoing her wisdom, that finally set me straight. The only true failure is living someone else's dream. I hadn't failed. I had simply been on the wrong path for their vision of success. The pain of rejection had taught me a profound truth. Family is earned. It's built on constant, consistent support and respect, not merely on shared DNA. The people who truly mattered, James, Lily, Nancy, Grandpa George, and now, even Sarah and the girls, were the ones who had shown up for me when the blood ties shattered. They had accepted the authentic Ava, the designer who found peace in an old cottage and satisfaction in helping small businesses. The cottage itself was a tangible reminder of my victory. I had poured my energy and my growing financial stability into it, lovingly restoring it to honor Grandma Samantha's spirit. The vibrant perennials I'd planted in her honor had taken root, becoming a burst of color where the weeds used to choke the earth. This home was my self-made sanctuary, proof of my resilience, and a legacy that no one, not even my parents with their legal threats and entitlement, could take away. They were gone, forced to face the consequences of their choices, while I was free to enjoy the fruits of mine. I heard the familiar crunch of tires on the gravel drive. It was Eleanor arriving for her Sunday visit. I smiled, a genuine, easy smile that touched my eyes. I stood up from the porch swing, the wood creaking softly beneath me, and walked out into the yard. Eleanor stepped out of her clean, silver sedan, dressed impeccably as always. She saw Sarah tying a lead rope to a fence post across the yard, her face etched with a moment of old anxiety, a quick, familiar shadow of the woman who worried over lost sons and fragile pride. But then, Sarah looked up. She saw Eleanor, paused her work, and offered a small, genuine smile. Eleanor returned it, nodding slightly, a gesture that spoke volumes. They were two women, forever linked by the man who was both their son, standing in the garden that had been the backdrop for the most dramatic turning point of all our lives. I walked over to Eleanor, placing a casual arm around her shoulder. She leaned into me, her fear completely subdued by my physical presence. My life had been remade. I had my roots now, two sets of them, woven together by a chosen family and a truth learned the hard way. Love defines family, not blood. The old, predictable life was gone, replaced by one that was complicated, challenging, and profoundly beautifully mine.